discuss this with former New York City Council Speaker Christine Quinn and former political director for George W. Bush, Matt Schlapp. Great to have both of you. Matt, let me start with you. Matt,
sure.
do you know what President Trump's strategy is?
No. I won't try to spin you here. If you look at those three answers, you can see potentially different paths. I would give General McMaster points for the right answer, which is all alternatives should always be on the table, and we ought to be careful about drawing lines that we don't intend to enforce, which is why the bombing was the right decision, because he actually said the use of chemical weapons is something we can't tolerate.
So, Matt, one more question for you before I get to Christine. So basically,
sure.
To your mind today, that was a one and done. That was a one and done solution. Assad used chemical weapons. We said that crosses a line. We sort of bombed the airfield, sort of, although on Saturday Assad was back to bombing his innocent civilians. So that's it.
Yeah, I guess I would look at it this way, which is airstrikes are only so effective, Allison. Presidents like to use them because they seem tidier, but at the end of the day, you don't really get accomplished what you want to get accomplished without using all of our everything at our disposal. So I like the fact that this was kind of a pinprick attack.
Sure.
I think, but I don't think anybody should read into this that we're going to war in Syria.
Okay. How do you see it, Christine?
Well, I find the fact that you have 3 or 4 different people in the Trump administration speaking for the Trump administration, but saying completely different things.
But doesn't that tell you that they just haven't cemented it yet? They don't. there is no doctrine in terms of what the plan is with Syria.
Look, if you haven't figured out a few steps yet, and I understand you're not going to necessarily, with a situation as complex as Syria, figure out A to Z. But one would hope we had beyond A, right? That at least we. But if you don't know, don't talk. What good does it do the American people in a very scary time to hear our international leaders within the United States say different things? Well, and how does that help our standing on the world stage?
Because my point, Chris, is that there is no plan beyond A. A was it. I mean, you hear Matt. We've heard our guests all morning. A was it. That was it. We're done. We sent a message. Assad, you cannot use chemical weapons, or we will bomb your airfield. We bombed the airfield. Now we're done.
But Nick Haley says, and I heard her both say it on the news over the weekend and last week, she alluded to this very clearly, strongly at the Women in the World conference, that it's not done. She's in the papers today, on television over the weekend, saying she sees the mission as accomplished when the leadership of Syria is changed. And she seems to be taking a hard line on Russia, where we hear the Secretary of State taking a very different line. These just don't seem the parts of the world we want to lack clarity on.
Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, I agree that Ambassador Haley seems more clear that the eventual goal should be to get rid of this dictator, Assad, in Syria.
Yeah,
but,
so why don't
McMaster
and Tillerson know that?
Well, because, look, I worked for President George W. Bush. We toppled a couple of authoritarian regimes, and you can be fighting in those countries for decades after, spending our treasure, having our young men and women, brave men and women, in harm's way. Look, look at that book that President...
Look, Matt, we know the dangers of war. We all know the possible repercussions. But we're talking about the messaging.
Right.
Why is Nikki Haley on a different page than the other officials?
Well, look, as I told you, I'm not going to spin you on it. It seemed like there were 3 different paths that were outlined over the weekend. I think what the American people should not be scared by this, but I think they should understand that the president is taking in the information and ascertaining what the right policy strategy is. Let me tell you, as someone who's worked in a White House, it happens on tax policy, it happens on health care policy. It shouldn't shock anybody. It also happens on these very fundamental questions of foreign affairs.
Okay.
But look, I don't disagree with Matt that the president needs to take things in and needs to hear from different people and make a final decision. That's not what's happening. We had 3 members of the administration go out and say contradictory things. And that was not some attempt, I believe, to... They were not in line and lockstep with each other. And this is what worries me and many, many of the American people, that the president made a decision that I think was the right decision, but a decision in a complex regime that needs to have a sense of a plan and a policy and a clarity.
Christine,
and that's what worries the American people, that he is over his head.
Go ahead.
Christine, if you agree with what he did, which is something Obama failed to do when he said that there was a line in the sand.
And the very same people who are applauding Trump criticized Obama. Sorry.
Give him the grace for the fact, that's okay, give him the grace for the fact that he made the right decision here. He's got very difficult decisions to make ongoing from here. Nobody believes that Assad is going to become some Boy Scout now. He's going to do all types of terrible things. We're going to have to deal with the all the repercussions of it. But he made a good step here. Now the question is, what does he do going forward? Yes, his advisors are trying to probably internally convince him of one path or another. But in the end, Donald Trump's going to make this decision, and I do not believe that that decision is going to be that we go to war with Syria.
I'm not urging that he do that, because I think that is obviously, you know, a terribly frightening decision right now, what you're saying, going to war with Syria. I'm not advocating that. Let me be clear at all. But what I think is just unacceptable is to have the UN ambassador and the Secretary of State saying things that are not in lockstep. And you know what? I'm not going to cut this president or any president slack when they're talking about brutal, horrible dictators like Assad and Vladimir Putin, and they're one day here, another official there.
But Christine, aren't President Trump's words the ones that we should actually be listening to above all this?
That's unclear from them.
Not exactly. I mean, what he has said is that I'm flexible. One day he feels one way, another day he feels another way. He's flexible.
That mystifies me.
I don't think that's
fair. Because I don't
fair.
understand how you're flexible about brutal dictators.
Okay.
And I don't understand why a child, a wee baby being killed in Syria by gas it is traumatizing. That was traumatizing to the president. But a dead Syrian baby on the shores in a soldier's arms, in terms of refugees, touches nothing in his heart. That flexibility.
Matt, why is my characterization of his flexibility not fair, do you think?
Well, because it implies that almost anything could happen, and I don't think that's fair at all. I think what we understand is that as a president, you have certain options when things happen, and he was willing to take this option. He could have chosen not to do that. I guess you can call that flexibility, but at the end of the day,
well, he calls it flexibility. I mean, I'm not calling it flexibility. I'm taking him at his word.
I just want to push back on the idea, if you mean by flexibility almost anything's on the table. I think that's wrong.
No, I mean, Matt, honestly, just so that I can clarify, he said that he was so struck by the pictures, the devastating pictures of children being killed, that's when he decided to act, because he's flexible. I mean, that's one of what he considers his positive attributes.
And those pictures,
he's open. I'd say this: he's open to the facts as they happen. And what we learned in Syria is that this terrible attack happened. He wants to have a more humble foreign policy. He doesn't want to be an interventionist, but there are lines.
Okay. Guys, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much.